Please, before we start, want guys to support me by hitting subscribe button, like, comment and turn on the notification bell to get notified anytime a new video is posted. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight the night Clara Reyes saved a man she was never supposed to meet. She was running late, again. Her second shift at the diner had run over by 40 minutes because Manny, the night cook, had called in sick and Clara had stayed to cover. She always stayed. That was the kind of person she was. The kind who stayed when everyone else left. She pulled her jacket tighter as she cut through Meridian Street, the shortcut she took every single night. The city smelled like wet concrete and cold coffee. Streetlights blinked above her, half of them dead. This part of town was not the kind of place the newspaper wrote stories about, unless something bad happened. Something bad had already happened. She heard it before she saw it. A low, metallic groan. Then the smell of burning rubber slicing through the rain. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong, the kind that wraps around you before your brain has caught up to your body. Clara turned the corner and stopped. A black car. Sleek, expensive, the kind of car that costs more than her father's entire hospital bill, had jumped the curb and crashed nose first into a concrete pillar. The hood was crumpled like paper. Steam hissed from the engine. The driver's side door hung open. A man lay half on the sidewalk, half on the road. He wasn't moving. Most people would have pulled out their phone and kept walking. Clara ran toward him. She dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the cold water soaking through her jeans. He was tall, even crumpled on the ground she could tell. Broad shoulders. Dark hair matted with blood on the left side of his temple. His suit was soaked through, charcoal gray and clearly tailored, which told her nothing except that he was not from this neighborhood. Hey, can you hear me? She pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. Pulse. Strong, actually. Stronger than she expected. His eyes fluttered. Dark. Almost black in the rain. They found her face for exactly 2 seconds before they closed again. Clara called the ambulance. Then she took off her jacket, her only jacket, and pressed it to the gash on his head to slow the bleeding. She talked to him the whole time, even when he didn't respond, because she had learned in the hospital waiting rooms she practically lived in that people in pain need to hear a voice. Any voice. Just something to follow back to the surface. It took the ambulance 9 minutes to arrive. Clara spent all 9 of them kneeling in the rain beside a stranger, one hand pressed to his wound, the other holding his cold hand because it seemed like the right thing to do. When the paramedics arrived, one of them asked for her name. She almost gave it. Then she looked at the man, really looked at him, and something in her gut told her to be careful. Men who drove cars like that had people who asked questions. She didn't want questions. Clara, she said. Just that. No last name. Then she picked up her soaked jacket, slipped back into the dark and walked home. She did not know she had just changed everything. 2 weeks later. Adrian Knight opened his eyes to white. White ceiling. White sheets. The sharp, flat smell of antiseptic. Hospital. The first thing he registered was pain, a dull, persistent throb above his left ear. The second thing he registered was that his personal physician, Dr. Harmon, was standing at the foot of his bed wearing the particular expression he wore when he had to deliver news Adrian was not going to like. You have a moderate concussion, 3 bruised ribs, and a laceration on your temple that required 6 stitches, Harmon said, wasting no time because he had worked for Adrian long enough to know that preamble was not appreciated. The car, Adrian said. His voice was hoarse. Total loss. Adrian closed his eyes. Not because of the car, he had 7 others. He closed them because he was remembering. The rain. The wheel jerking suddenly, violently, in a direction he had not steered it. The guardrail that should have been there and wasn't. The pillar coming up too fast. And then a face. A girl's face, pale in the rain, dark eyes locked on his. Her voice low and steady, I've got you. Stay with me. He opened his eyes. Who found me? Harmon shifted. Paramedics responded to a 911 call. No one was at the scene when they arrived, except you. Someone called it in. Yes. The call was made from a prepaid cell phone. The number is unregistered. Harmon paused. Whoever it was, they stayed with you until the ambulance arrived. The paramedics said they found a jacket pressed to your wound. It wasn't yours. Adrian said nothing for a long moment. In 34 years, no one had ever done something for him without wanting something back. Not his father. Not his board members. Not any of the women who had orbited his life like satellites locked in his gravitational pull. Every gesture in his world had a price attached. Someone had pressed their jacket to his bleeding head in the cold and the rain and then disappeared without leaving a name. He didn't know why that felt like the most remarkable thing that had ever happened to him. But it did. "Find her," he said. Harmon blinked. "Sir." "The woman who called it in. Find her." He said it the way he said everything. Quiet, precise, with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been told no and had no idea how to process it if he was. What he didn't say, what he couldn't have explained even to himself, was that the moment her face appeared in his memory, something strange happened. The cold weight he carried in his chest every single day, the one he had stopped noticing because it had been there so long, shifted. Just slightly. Just enough to notice. He wanted to know who she was. He wanted to know why she ran. Marcus Webb, Knight Holdings head of security and the best investigator on Adrian's private payroll, walked into the corner office on the 42nd floor 2 weeks later and placed a single manila folder on the desk. Clara Reyes, 24 years old. Graduated top of her class from Whitmore Community College. No degree, she dropped out halfway through her junior year. No social media presence worth mentioning. Works 2 jobs. Daytime checkout clerk at Greenfield Grocery, night shift waitress at Manny's Diner on Meridian Street. Marcus paused. Lives in apartment 4C on Bowen Avenue. Pays her rent 3 days late every month. Not because she's irresponsible. Because she's paying for her father's dialysis treatments. Adrian had been looking out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city below. He turned now. Her father. Ernesto Reyes. Stage 3 kidney disease. He needs a transplant that his insurance won't fully cover. The shortfall is approximately $230,000. She's been trying to fundraise it for 8 months. Marcus set another page on the desk. She has raised $11,000. Adrian picked up the photograph clipped to the inside of the folder. She looked different in daylight. Still the same dark eyes, same strong jaw. But in the photograph, taken from a distance, her laughing at something the old man in the grocery checkout line had said, she looked light. Like a person who had not let the weight of her life make her heavy. He looked at the photo for a very long time. Then he called his lawyer. Clara was stacking canned peaches when she felt someone watching her. She turned and the can she was holding slipped from her fingers. She caught it, barely, because she was looking at the man standing at the end of the aisle, and the man was looking back at her and her brain was doing something very confusing. As she recognized him. But she also absolutely could not reconcile the person she recognized. Unconscious, blood on his face, rain-soaked and completely helpless, with the person standing in front of her now. He was the kind of man who made a room rearrange itself around him without him doing anything. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than Clara's monthly take-home. He was tall. He was composed. He had the controlled, precise stillness of someone who was never surprised. He was looking at her like she was the only thing in the room. "Clara Reyes," he said. "Not a question. You need to be in the dairy aisle if you want milk," she said because her mouth did that sometimes, talked before her brain gave permission. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the possibility of one. "My name is. I know who you are." She turned back to the shelf. "Adrian Knight. Knight Holdings. You're on the cover of Forbes every other year. You crashed your car on Meridian Street 2 weeks ago and apparently decided to come buy your own groceries today, which good for you." She heard him take one step closer. "You saved my life." She kept stacking cans. "The paramedics saved your life. I just made a phone call. You pressed your jacket to a wound that, according to my doctor, would have bled critically if left unattended. You stayed with me for 9 minutes in the rain. You held my hand. A beat. You didn't tell anyone your name." The can she was reaching for stopped mid-air. "What do you want, Mr. Knight?" "To offer you something." She turned around fully now, arms crossed, expression flat. She had grown up in a neighborhood where men in expensive suits only came to offer things that weren't actually offers. "If you're here to pay me for what I did," she said quietly, "I'm going to need you to turn around and leave. I'm not here to pay you." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a business card. Plain. Just his name and a number. He set it on the shelf beside her. "I'm here to offer you a contract." He stared at the card. "A contract. A marriage contract. 18 months. Public appearances, shared residence, zero personal obligations beyond maintaining the arrangement in public spaces. He said it the way you'd describe a business deal, which she supposed was exactly what he was doing. In exchange, I will personally finance your father's surgery, his postoperative care, and his recovery. Every cent. No conditions. The silence that followed was so complete that Clara could hear the refrigeration units humming at the end of the aisle. You're insane, she said. I've been told that. I don't know you. You don't know me. I know enough. Why? The word came out sharper than she intended. Why me? You could hire anyone. You could have an actress, a model, someone who would want something, he said. And for the first time something in his voice changed. Barely. Like a door opening 1 inch. Everyone I know wants something from me. You had the opportunity to want something. You had leverage most people would have sold their soul for, and you walked away in the rain without a word. He looked at her steadily. That is why you. Clara looked at the business card on the shelf. She thought about her father. About the way he looked smaller every time she visited him, the dialysis taking something from him each time. About the $11,000 she had scraped together over 8 months, and how it might as well be $11 for all the difference it made. She thought about everything she would be agreeing to. She thought about everything she would be risking. He picked up the card. I'll call you tonight, she said. And Mr. Knight? If this is a trick, I will find a way to make your life difficult that no amount of money can fix. This time he did smile. Just barely. Just at the corner of his mouth, like it had escaped before he could stop it. I believe you, he said. And then he walked out of the grocery store and Clara stood alone in the canned goods aisle and tried to remember how to breathe. She called him at 10:47 p.m. He answered on the first ring. I have conditions, she said. Tell me. My father's surgery is scheduled and funded before I sign anything. In writing through your lawyer and mine, I'll get one. No physical contact beyond what is absolutely necessary for public appearances. Separate bedrooms. I keep my jobs for the first month until I know this is real. And you tell me the truth about why you actually need this. All of it. Pause. Long enough that she wondered if she had pushed too hard. Knight Holdings is finalizing a merger with Voss International, he said finally. Henrik Voss is 71 years old. He is old-fashioned in ways that are inconvenient. He will not finalize a billion-dollar deal with an unmarried CEO who, as of last quarter, was photographed leaving 3 separate events with 3 separate women. Pause. My board has been circling the same concern for 2 years. The word they use in private meetings is volatile. They mean emotionally unavailable, which they associate with poor long-term judgment. Are they wrong? Clara asked. Another pause. This one felt different. No, he said. Probably not. But that's not their decision to make. Clara exhaled slowly. Okay. I'll do it. But I meant what I said about making your life difficult. I know you did. And somehow, impossibly, she could hear the almost smile in his voice through the phone. They hung up. Clara sat on the edge of her bed in apartment 4C and stared at the crack in the ceiling she had been meaning to report to the landlord for 6 months. She had just agreed to marry a man she had met twice. Once in the rain while he was unconscious. Once in a canned goods aisle. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Like something was finally happening. 3 days later. The apartment Adrian's team had prepared for them was on the 38th floor of a building that Clara had walked past 100 times without ever imagining she would live in. Her bedroom alone was larger than her entire apartment on Bowen Avenue. She stood in the middle of it with her one suitcase at her feet and tried to look like she belonged there. The housekeeper, a warm woman named Rosa who had apparently worked for Adrian for 6 years, showed her around with the practiced efficiency of someone used to processing the fact that her employer's personal life was complicated. Mr. Knight usually has breakfast at 6:15, Rosa said. He takes his coffee black, no sugar. He doesn't eat before 8 p.m. if he's had a difficult day, so I've learned to keep dinner warm. He works in the study until midnight most nights. He does not like noise after 10. Good thing I'm quiet, Clara said. Rosa gave her a look that was equal parts sympathy and warning. You seem like a kind person, Miss Reyes. My advice, don't try to change him. Don't try to fix him. Just, she shrugged, be in the room. Sometimes that's enough. Clara thought that was an odd thing to say. She thought about it right up until dinner, when she and Adrian sat across from each other at a dining table long enough to seat 12 and had the most painfully formal meal of her life. He asked about her father. She told him the surgery was scheduled for the following Thursday, that her father thought she had gotten a very good job, that she had not told him the truth about the arrangement because his heart could not take it. Adrian listened without interrupting. Most people interrupted. She noticed that he didn't. She asked him about the merger. He gave her a brief, clean overview. She asked a follow-up question about the regulatory framework. He stopped eating and looked at her. "You dropped out of college," he said. It wasn't an insult. It was genuine confusion. "I dropped out of college because my father's medical bills hit 6 figures and someone had to pay them. I didn't stop reading." She took a sip of water. "You should also know that Henrik Voss's company has a compliance issue in their Frankfurt division that hasn't been made public yet. If you close this deal before that surfaces, you'll own part of that problem." The look on his face was something she couldn't name. It wasn't the boardroom mask, careful, neutral, unreachable. It was something closer to surprise. "How do you know that?" "I looked you up after you came to the store. Then I looked up everything connected to you. It seemed smart." She set her glass down. "I'm not just a prop, Mr. Knight. If I'm going to be your wife in public, I'm going to actually help you or I'm going to feel useless, and feeling useless makes me difficult." There was a beat of silence. "Adrian," he said. She blinked. "What?" "If we're going to be married in public, you should probably use my first name." She looked at him for a long moment. Something small and unexpected moved through her chest, and she didn't entirely trust it. "Adrian," she said. And somehow it sounded different out loud than it had in her head. The first public appearance was a charity gala 3 weeks into the arrangement. Clara wore a dress the stylist had chosen. Deep burgundy, fitted at the waist, simple in a way that made it look expensive, which it was. She had practiced walking in heels for 2 days, alone in the apartment when Adrian was at the office. She did not expect him to stop in the hallway when he saw her. He stopped. Just for a second. Just long enough for something to move behind his eyes before the boardroom mask clicked back into place. "You look appropriate," he said. "Thank you," she said. "So do you." It was not romantic. It was barely warm. But it was something, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. The gala was a study in performance. Adrian was smooth, controlled, every word and gesture precisely calibrated. Clara watched him work a room with the kind of focus she had previously only seen in surgeons. He knew which person to spend 3 minutes with, which to spend 8, which to compliment and which to challenge. He was brilliant at it, and there was something almost sad about how brilliant he was at it. Like watching someone who had gotten very, very good at something they never actually wanted to do. Then Henrik Voss found them. He was smaller than Clara had imagined. A compact, sharp-eyed man in his 70s, with a firm handshake and the particular way of looking at people that meant he was deciding something about them immediately. He took Clara's hand, held it between both of his, and studied her face. "So you're the woman who caught Adrian Knight," he said. His accent was faintly Dutch, warm at the edges. "I prefer to think we caught each other," Clara said, and felt Adrian's hand press very slightly at the small of her back. The first time he had touched her outside of the brief moments they'd staged for photographers. Voss laughed. "Genuinely. I like her," he said to Adrian. Then to Clara. "He is a difficult man to know. Most people stop trying. I suspect you are not most people." "No," she said. "I'm really not." Later, in the car on the way home, Adrian said, "You handled Voss better than any of my actual executives have. He wasn't hard to read. He wanted to know if you were real. If she gestured at herself, was real. I'm not going to fake warmth for someone who can tell the difference." He was quiet for a moment. The city slid past the windows in long streaks of light. What was he deciding? Adrian said. "When he looked at you. Whether you were lonely," she said. And then she turned to look out the window so she wouldn't have to see his face when she said it. "He was looking for someone who had gone in and found the person underneath. He wanted to know if you had let someone in." The silence that followed lasted the rest of the ride home. But when they got to the apartment, Adrian paused at the door to his study. For a moment he looked like he was going to say something. The mask was down, she could see it, clear as anything, the thing underneath. The exhaustion. The weight. Then he said, "Good night, Clara," and went inside and closed the door. She stood in the hall and understood for the first time exactly what Rosa had meant. Sometimes just being in the room was enough. And sometimes the room was all someone had. 6 weeks into the arrangement, things changed in small ways. Adrian started coming home at 10 instead of midnight. Not always, but sometimes. Clara pretended not to notice, the way you pretend not to notice when a stray cat finally eats from a bowl you've left out. She left books on the kitchen counter. Not as suggestions, just her books because she read everywhere. He started picking them up, putting them back wrong side up, which drove her a little crazy. Then she noticed he was folding the corners of pages, which meant he was actually reading them. She confronted him about the corner folding. He told her bookmarks were inefficient. She told him ruining a book was practically a crime. He said only people with excess time bought bookmarks. She told him a sticky note cost 4 cents. He said he'd have his assistant order her 100 of them. She laughed. He blinked at the sound of it like he wasn't sure what to do with it. They started eating dinner at the same time. Not by agreement, it just happened. Then talking during dinner. Then talking after, sometimes for an hour, sometimes more, in the living room with the lights of the city spread out behind them like scattered stars. He told her about building Knight Holdings from the asset his father had left him. An asset that was actually a debt. A failing company his father had mismanaged for 15 years and then handed to a 22-year-old Adrian like a grenade with the pin already pulled. He had rebuilt it in 5 years. People called him ruthless for it. Were you? She asked. Yes, he said. No hesitation. You have to be, to save something that everyone has already given up on. He looked at her. Ruthlessness isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it's just refusing to pretend something is fine when it isn't. She thought about that for a long time after he said it. She told him about her mother. A woman who had left when Clara was 9, who had sent birthday cards until Clara was 14 and then stopped. She told him about her father who had never once made her feel like she was raising him instead of the other way around, even when she clearly was. She told him about dropping out of college and how she had cried in the bathroom of the hospital the night she made that decision, alone, so her father wouldn't hear. He listened to all of it. And when she finished he said, "Your father is lucky." She thought he meant lucky to have the surgery. Then she looked at him and realized he meant something else entirely. "So are you," she said quietly. And she meant it. He looked away. But she saw it, the way something moved across his face. The way the wall, so carefully built and so long maintained, developed its first real crack. It started with a phone call Clara wasn't supposed to hear. She had come back from visiting her father, who was 3 weeks post-surgery, recovering better than anyone had dared hope, and found the apartment quiet. Adrian's study door was open a few inches. She was about to knock when she heard his voice, low and tightly controlled, which meant he was angry. He only went that quiet when he was angry. She stopped. "I'm telling you, Daniel, the brake failure was not mechanical. The diagnostic report from the insurance company doesn't match what my own team found." Pause. "Someone tampered with the car." Clara went very still. "I know what I'm saying." Another pause longer. "No. Don't involve the police yet. I need to know who first." "Yes. All of them. Especially the board." One more pause. "I said especially the board, Daniel." The call ended. Clara was already moving quietly back down the hall. She made it to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and stood at the counter with her hands very flat on the cold marble and tried to think clearly. The accident had not been an accident. Someone had tried to kill Adrian Knight. And he knew it. And he was keeping it quiet, which meant he had a reason to keep it quiet. Which meant he either knew who it was, or he was afraid of what he'd find when he looked. She made 2 cups of tea. Carried them both to the study. Knocked. "Come in." She set 1 cup in front of him and sat down across from his desk. He looked up from the papers in front of him, registered the cup, then registered her face. His eyes sharpened. "You heard." "Some of it." He said nothing. He was recalibrating, she could see it, the internal calculation of how much to tell her and how much to contain. She had learned his face over 8 weeks. He knew this look. "Don't," she said. "Don't decide how much of the truth I can handle. That's not your call." Something in him settled. Like he had been braced for something and it hadn't come. "The night of the accident," he said, "my car's braking system was interfered with. The failure was not random. Someone knew my route, knew the timing, and knew exactly which component to compromise for maximum effect. He met her eyes. That requires access. Physical access to the vehicle. And knowledge of my schedule. Clara wrapped her hands around her mug. That's someone close to you. Yes. How many people had that level of access? My driver. My head of security. He paused. 3 members of my board of directors who attended the dinner I left that night and knew my car, my route, and my habits. Another pause. And my brother. The word landed in the room with a weight she hadn't expected. You have a brother? James. He's not in the company publicly. He owns 12% of Knight Holdings through a holding structure our father set up before he died. Adrian's jaw tightened fractionally. He's been pushing for a board vote to restructure my executive control for 18 months. The merger with Voss would consolidate my position permanently. If the deal closes, he loses his leverage. Claire was quiet for a moment. The tea steamed between them. Adrian. Has James ever? He's my brother. That's not what I asked. He looked at her for a long time. And this time he didn't look away. No, he said. He's never done anything like this. We haven't spoken in 2 years, but he has never. He stopped. His hand on the desk, she noticed, was absolutely still. The stillness of someone controlling something very tightly. I don't want it to be him. It was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. She reached across the desk and put her hand over his. Just that. No words. He looked down at her hand like it was a foreign object, and then, slowly, like a man who had forgotten how, he turned his hand over and held hers. They stayed like that for a long time. She didn't know in that moment that someone was watching. That somewhere else in the city, a man was looking at photographs of the two of them. Not gala photographs, not staged ones. Private ones. Photos taken through a long lens from a building across the street. And that man was making a phone call of his own. The information came from Marcus Webb at 6 in the morning, 2 days later. Clara was awake. She was always awake by 5:30, an old habit from years of early shifts, and she was in the kitchen when she heard Adrian's phone ring. She heard him answer. She heard the silence that followed. Then she heard him say very quietly, "Send it to me." She waited. He came into the kitchen 10 minutes later. He was dressed, which meant he hadn't slept. He put his phone face down on the counter and looked at her. It wasn't James, he said. She exhaled something she'd been holding for 2 days. The tampering was traced through the maintenance log to a third-party contractor who was hired 6 weeks before the accident. The payment came through a shell company. He picked up the phone and slid it across the counter to her. She looked at the screen. At the name at the end of the money trail. It was a name she recognized. Not because she knew the person. Because she had seen the name in the boardroom photographs she'd found when she researched Adrian weeks ago. Richard Callaway. Knight Holdings' oldest board member. A man who had been on the board for 19 years. A man who had been Adrian's father's closest advisor. A man who had been trusted. Why, she said. The Voss merger would trigger a clause in the company charter that would allow me to buy out minority board positions. Callaway is one of them. Adrian's voice was completely flat. He would lose his seat, his dividends, and his influence in a single transaction. 19 years of positioning gone. Pause. He decided it was easier to eliminate the problem. He decided to kill you. Yes. Claire put the phone down. She was looking at him very carefully. At the careful steadiness of his face, the way he was holding himself like something was trying to move inside him and he wouldn't let it. Adrian. I'm fine. You're not, she said. Gentle but direct. You just found out someone you've known your entire professional life tried to have you killed. You don't have to be fine right now. He turned away. Moved to the window. The city was gray and early, the sun just beginning to show its color at the horizon. He was at my father's funeral, he said. The words came out differently from his usual ones. Slower. Like they were being pulled from somewhere deep. He gave a speech. About loyalty. Clara crossed the kitchen and stood beside him at the window. Not touching. Just there. Just present. The way Rosa had told her weeks ago when she had no idea what it meant. They stood there together while the city came to light. What happens now? She asked. Callaway will be arrested. The merger will close. The board will restructure. He was back to the controlled voice. But his shoulder closest to her had dropped half an inch. Just half an inch. And then this. He stopped. She knew what word came next. The arrangement. Then this arrangement ends. And then this, he said. Just that. He didn't finish the sentence. And neither did she. The merger closed on a Tuesday. There was a press event. Photographs. Adrian signing documents across from Henrik Voss, who caught Clara's eye across the room and gave her the smallest, sharpest nod, like a man who had gotten exactly the answer he was looking for. That night the apartment was very quiet. Clara had started packing. Just small things. Her books, her spare sweaters, the photograph of her and her father she kept on the nightstand. She hadn't said anything to Adrian. The contract was clear. The merger closed, the arrangement ended. Her father was healthy. She had held up her end. He had held up his. Everything was going exactly as agreed. She was pulling a stack of books from the shelf when Adrian appeared in the doorway of her room. He looked at the half-filled bag on the bed. He looked at her. His face was doing the thing where it was absolutely still, which she now knew meant the opposite of nothing. "You're packing," he said. "The merger closed today." She kept her voice even. "That was the term. I know what the terms were. I wrote them." She turned back to the shelf. Her hands, she noticed, were not quite steady. She took a breath. "Clara. Don't." He put the books down. Turned around. He was still in the doorway and she understood suddenly that he hadn't come in, that he was standing exactly on the threshold, and she didn't know if that was because he was uncertain or because he was asking permission. "I am not good at this," he said. The words came out rough, like they had been worn smooth by being held too long and then finally released. "I've been told that many times in many ways. I know it's true. I have spent my entire adult life making sure I was very good at everything that could be calculated and very careful to stay away from everything that couldn't." She waited. "You cannot be calculated," he said. "You are the single most uncalculable person I have ever met, and I have been completely unable to resolve what to do with that for 2 months." She almost laughed. He didn't. "You could just say what you mean," she said. "I mean," he took one step into the room, "that I don't want you to go. I mean that the past 2 months have been the first time in years that I came home to something other than silence and found that I minded the silence. I mean, another step, that you are the only person who has ever stood in the rain with me. Metaphorically. Which is worse actually, because at least in the rain I had the excuse of being unconscious." Clara looked at him. At the carefully composed man who was being, for the first time in possibly years, completely uncomposed. She thought about walking away. It was the safe thing. The practical thing. She had her father back. She had survived this intact, which was more than she had honestly expected when she picked up a stranger's business card in a canned goods aisle. She thought about all of that. And then she thought about the look on his face the first time she'd made him laugh. About the folded page corners in every book he'd touched. About him holding her hand in the dark of his study and not letting go. "You know this won't be easy," she said. "Nothing worth anything is. You're difficult and controlled, and you work too much, and you fold the corners of pages, which is genuinely offensive. You leave books everywhere, and you talk before you think, and you stood in the rain for 9 minutes with a complete stranger and then disappeared into the dark, which is..." He paused, "completely characteristic of you and completely maddening, and I don't..." He stopped. "I don't want to stop knowing you." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the book from the top of the pile. Held it out to him. "Come in then," she said. "And put this back on the shelf. Right side up." He crossed the room. He took the book. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, and neither of them moved away. He put the book on the shelf. Right side up. She exhaled. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Miss Reyes." The voice on the other end was male, older, with the particular smoothness of someone who had spent decades in rooms with powerful people. "My name is not important. What is important is that you listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you about your husband." The word hung in the air. "Husband. Mr. Calloway has associates," the voice continued. "Associates who are unhappy about the current situation. And who have spent the last week looking very carefully at the documentation surrounding your marriage." Her heart was very loud in her ears. "They found the original contract, Miss Reyes. The real one. Voss. What do you think happens to the Voss merger when Henrik Voss learns this marriage was a business arrangement? What do you think happens to Knight Holdings stock when the board learns their CEO fabricated a personal life to close a deal? Adrian was watching her. He had gone completely still. What do you want? She said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. We want Adrian Knight to step down from his position as CEO. Voluntarily. Within 48 hours. If he does, the documentation disappears. If he doesn't, another pause. Well, you seem like a smart woman. I think you can imagine. The call ended. Clara lowered the phone. She looked at Adrian, who was reading her face with the focused intensity of a man who was very rapidly understanding the shape of what had just happened. She watched him arrive at it, the calculation running behind his eyes, all the possible moves, all the consequences. She watched him reach the part where he understood that if she told him to comply, everything Callaway's people wanted would happen. And if she told him to fight, the thing between them, this real, complicated, unplanned thing, would be the first casualty. Because the moment that contract became public, everything would be framed as a lie. And maybe it had started as one. But somewhere between a rainy sidewalk and a canned goods aisle and 9 weeks of folded page corners and 2 cups of tea and one held hand in the dark, it had become something else. Something that had no name in any contract she had ever read. Clara, Adrian said. His voice was very quiet. What did they say? She looked at the phone in her hand. Looked at him. Looked at the book standing upright on the shelf behind him, right side up exactly where she'd asked him to put it. And she understood that the next words out of her mouth would decide everything. Not the merger. Not the company. Not the headlines. Everything. She opened her mouth. To be continued. Part 2, The Real War, coming soon.